Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We'll start in a moment, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah ta'ala, today we're going to cover Surah Naziat, which is the second surah in Juz Amma. So Surah Naziat will first recite some of the ayat, then inshallah ta'ala we'll go through some of the commentary and the translation, inshallah ta'ala. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والنازيات غرقا والناشطات نشطا والسابحات سبحا فالسابقات سبقا فالمدبرات أمرا يوم ترجف الراجفة تتبعها الرادفة قلوب يومئذ واجفة أبصارها خاشعة صدق الله العظيم. So inshallah ta'ala, look at the explanations first. So sometimes there are various reasons why different surahs are revealed in the Quran, and sometimes the reasons for those revelations are known, and other times those revelations are not clear. Sometimes the Prophet ﷺ would indicate why it was revealed, or sometimes the Sahaba were present and they would know the reason, and they would elaborate on that reason. So this surah basically, as you'll see when we go through it, starts by talking about the concept of death from an Islamic perspective. So sometimes you'll find in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He makes certain points, He sometimes uses oaths, qasams as they call in Arabic, to kind of emphasize the meaning of what He's trying to say. Now, the reason this could be is because sometimes the news that they're getting, or the information that Allah Ta'ala is telling us, might be, something that they're not used to and find difficult to believe in. Or maybe it's so shocking or amazing that, it needs some sort of emphasis behind it to kind of get them to understand it and accept it. Or it might be just simply the case that Allah Ta'ala is trying to prove to them of the truth of the matter. So obviously we don't need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to prove to us, because Allah Ta'ala is almighty and knows, but then at the same time, sometimes for emphasis and sometimes to give importance to something, Allah Ta'ala will use an oath to kind of start the conversation off. So you'll see this in other surahs as well. So sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions an oath by certain things. So sometimes He might say, I swear by the pen, by the sun, by the moon, etc. So when people take an oath generally in Sharia, our principle is that basically you only take an oath in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's haram to take the oath in any other name. So just looking at the first verse then, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins the surah by saying وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرَقًا, which basically means that I swear by those angels who pull out, the souls of the non-believers vigorously. So the word nazi'at basically means to pull, to take out, to pull. So the word is feminine in its construct from an Arabic grammar perspective, but that doesn't have an effect on the meaning of what it's trying to convey. And gharqa, which means drowning, also means that they dive in, and it means to pull out. So there's kind of a few meanings that are surrounded by that word. So in other words, to get an understanding of what Allah Ta'ala is trying to say here, is that Allah Ta'ala is taking an oath with the angels of death, and it is the angels that actually come at the time of death to actually extract the soul of somebody. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He's determined a time for a person to leave the dunya, then the angel of death will come, and basically it is his task then to take out the ruh and take it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here it's saying that the soul, when the angels are pulling out, is kind of drowning. Now, because the first type here describes the soul of a kafir, so here in this case we're talking about a person, either a sinful person or a disbeliever, And this person, when his death comes, obviously he doesn't really want to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when the angel comes to this type of person, the ruh in that person doesn't want to come out. Now it could be because he or she is attached to dunya, their assets, their wealth, their family, etc. Or he knows that he's been disobedient and doesn't really want to face up to the consequences. So then when the angel comes to actually take the ruh, he realizes now that his fate is tied and he is going to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Prophet ﷺ mentioned that when the angel of death comes to this person, the ruh tries to hide. And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that it gathers in the nail of the hand. Yani the whole soul will try and squeeze into the nail of the hand. But the angels are going to basically follow the commands that it's been given. Yani if it's time for the ruh to go back, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take the ruh back. And the angel will basically then try and go into the body and try and extract the ruh. So this is why you find that sometimes at the time of death, people do feel a lot of pain. And this sort of extreme height of pain is called Naziat. So when the soul is being pulled, it is when basically the soul is being pulled out. Now, the question we should ask ourselves is, how do we want to go? How do we want our ruh to be taken out? Because if we want to go back properly in a nice fashion and not being like literally ripped out, then basically we need to make sure that we live our life according to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if that's the case, then inshallah ta'ala, when the angel of death comes, then we'll have an easy departure. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example, saw the angel of death, Jibreel alayhi salam was actually also with him in the room at that time. Now, it is something that's very, very specific to the Anbiya alayhimus salam. Yani that the angel of death actually takes permission. Now, this is only, as I said, just for the prophets. So at this point, when the angel of death came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam looked at Jibreel alayhi salam as if he was asking him what to do. And then Jibreel alayhi salam mentioned that your Lord wants to meet you. So can you imagine that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was the main point of focus in your life, and you had deep love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then he says, I want to meet you, then of course you're going to be very eager to go, and you'll be in a rush to go, in fact. So in this case, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, pure is Allah who is the highest. Now it also mentions that Aisha radiallahu anha was there at the time, and she couldn't see anything, but she said at that point, I knew that he must have been given a choice, and he had chosen his Rabb to go back to. Ibn Mas'ud mentions that the angel of death takes out the soul from every hair and nail of that person, because the ruh is actually spread out throughout the body. So he is going to make sure that every part of the soul is taken out. Israel alayhi salam is the angel of death, and what the Mufassirin mention is that he also has a team of angels, that he doesn't come alone, but he is actually the leader of those angels. So this verse here, the first verse that mentions the drowning or the taking out by a very forceful manner, as we mentioned, it is related to a person who is either a sinner or a kafir, a disbeliever. So Prophet ﷺ mentioned, when a sinner dies, the soul is pulled out from the body like silk is pulled from a thorny bush. Yani this is how the pain is felt. So if you imagine if you have a nice silk cloth and it's thrown over some like thorns, and you try and yank that, it's going to tear in multiple places, etc. So this is kind of just a parable of the kind of pain that a person would experience in that. So then we got the second verse, which is وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا. So this basically means, and by the ones who open. So nasht basically means to open something. So here basically it means that the angel of death is opening something which is closed or blocked. So ulama say that it is like opening a tap. How does the water come out? Yani when a tap is opened, the water flows out very easily, generally, as though it's ready to come out and has just been released. So here the angels are actually taking out the soul of a pious person, because he's flowing out and doesn't have to be dragged out. Yani he's eager to go back to his Rabb. He knows he spent all his life working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and adhering to the ahkam of the deen. So now he's ready to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's actually ready, and the ruh is basically then taken out very, very easily. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in a hadith, "Ad-dunya sijnul al-mu'min." Yani, in other words, that the world is a prison for the mu'min, for the believer. So once a person is in prison, it's hard, it's tough, life is difficult. Then when they get the opportunity to become free, they're very eager to go. And just like that, the mu'min, the believer who's tried all his life to try and follow the commands of the deen, work hard, strive hard, provide for his family, do righteous deeds, etc. Now is his time to actually go back to his Rabb. So he is basically, very happy to go and very eager. So now he's hurrying basically so that he can go and meet with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then inshallah ta'ala attain Jannah. Then the next verse, number 3, وَالسَّابِحَاتِ الصَّبْحَةِ, basically means, and by the ones who swimming. So as-sabihat basically means to swim. So this is referring to the swimming in the sky. So both of these angels are swimming in the sky, swimming through the heavens, and they take the soul upwards smoothly. Now I'm just going to elaborate here a little bit, because there's an actual hadith narrated in the book of Imam Ahmad where Prophet ﷺ kind of describes the process of death. So it's good to understand this, inshallah ta'ala, in the context of what we're reading. So basically it says here that when a pious person dies, then the angel of death comes with a team of angels who have beautiful glowing faces, and the perfume from Jannah is on those angels. Prophet ﷺ said that the angel of death sits near the person's head and says an ayat of the Quran, which is a beautiful ayat. It says, "O peaceful soul, come to your Lord, content and happy, and come among his slaves and enter his paradise." Subhanallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us be from amongst those people who hear those beautiful words at the time of our departure. Ameen. So when this announcement is made, the soul flies out. And Prophet ﷺ gave a comparison that is like when a tap is opened and the water flows out. Then the Prophet ﷺ said that the soul is then wrapped into a shroud or a cloth, just like a baby is wrapped into a receiving blanket when it's born. This cloth is also a perfumed cloth from Jannah. So then they take this ruh in this cloth up to heaven, up to the heavens. So when they're going up, because of the fragrance spreading out on the way up, various angels smell this fragrance and they ask, "Who is this?" The angel of death takes the person's name and says, "This is such and such son or daughter of such and such person, and Allah is pleased with him or her." So all the angels of the first sky say, "Peace be upon you," yani assalamu alaikum. Then they go up to each heaven and all the angels say their salam. Then this person is shown the hellfire. So he gets to see the hellfire, and the angel says, "Don't worry, you could have come here, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has saved you." Then Jannah will be shown to him or her, and he will be told, this is going to be your home. Now the angel brings the soul back into the body, and this is basically now for the process of the questioning of the grave. So these are the questions that a person gets asked when they're put into their qabr. So the angels basically of the grave ask a series of questions, which I'll kind of briefly mention here. So one is Man Rabbuk, yani who is your Rabb, who is your Lord? So the person will say basically he is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the angels will say Sadaqta. And this is assuming obviously he's a pious person. Then it will be asked, who is your prophet? Man nabiyuka? And he will answer Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then angels will say Sadaqta. And then he will say Ma dinuk? What is your deen? And he will say Islam. And then the angels will say Sadaqta. Then the angels basically will then make the grave spacious, and a window from Jannah will be opened, and a breeze will be coming in from Jannah. And the angels will say, sleep like the sleep of a new bride. Now it's interesting why they said sleep of a new bride. So ulama have written that the reason they use this metaphor, this example, is that because when a lady gets married, she's very nervous all day that how is her husband going to find her? Is he going to like her, etc. So she has this nervousness about her. And then eventually when she actually meets her husband and they spend the night together and he's accepted her and is happy with her, etc., then she knows in the morning that he will be the one that she wakes up to, and she will know that she will be, when she knows this, she'll become relaxed, etc. And there's no tension in her anymore. So she has this sort of reassurance that everything is okay. So just like that, the angels say to this person that now you can rest, just like the rest of a new bride. And then in the grave, this person will have his companions. Now, what are these companions? These are going to be his good a'mal that will come and keep him company. Then on the other side, the flip side now, Prophet ﷺ also mentioned the situation of a sinner when he dies. So it starts with the soul basically hiding in the body, and the angel of death then basically literally going inside the body to extract the soul from every part of the body. So obviously this is, you can imagine, is going to be quite a difficult task. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, their faces are dark and their eyes are red and their teeth are long and they smell very unpleasant. So this is obviously the first fright that's given to the person as he's dying, that he sees, an unsightly sort of figure of an angel that's not looking very pleasant. And they will now call out, "O wretched soul." So in above, and for the pious person it said, "O peaceful soul," or contented soul. Now they're saying, "O wretched soul, come to the anger of your Rabb, your Lord." And the soul is then pulled out, like that example that I mentioned earlier, like a silk cloth is pulled out from a thorny bush. And then once they've taken the soul out, it's put into a very smelly cloth. And it's wrapped up, and then basically every other creation can smell it except for the humans and the jinn. And even the animals, dogs and cats, can smell this. The angels then ask, who is this person? They smell the filthy smell, and the angels basically in each of the heavens ask who this is. And the reply is given that it's such and such a person, son and daughter of such and such a person. And then this person is actually then shown Jannah first. Taken up to the heavens, he sees what's there, and then he is told that this is what you could have had you worked for it in the dunya. Then this soul is then shown hellfire. And then it's told to him that this is going to be where you will go. And again the soul will be taken to the qabr, and the same questioning will begin. And in this situation, even if this person is a Muslim, but because he's been sinful, he will actually end up struggling to answer the questions that are put to him. Sometimes people have this impression that actually I'm Muslim and potentially, I will die in state of Iman, so even if I do die like that, I'll eventually go to Jannah. A bit like what we mentioned yesterday in Surah Naba. But the reality is that, if you haven't lived your life according to the deen, and you've kind of been really, really sinful, etc., not made tawbah and all these type of things, then when these questions are put to you, it's going to be like your mind has gone blank. So yes, you were under the label of being a Muslim, but is your life reflective of living life as a Muslim? So, those questions will be put to him, and he will actually end up struggling answering any of these questions. And as he stumbles on these questions, the angels will start actually lashing him with a whip. And then they'll ask him basically about who his prophet was. Now imagine if you don't follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, then chances are that you're going to stumble. And again, there'll be like the punishment for him at that stage for struggling with that question as well. And then they'll ask what his deen was. Now even if he was a Muslim, he will not necessarily be able to answer the question based upon how he lived his life. So if there was no sign of Islam in his life, then the reality is he will probably struggle to answer that question. If he lived his life, with the name of a Muslim, but did everything that the kuffar did, celebrate all the celebrations of kuffar celebrate, observe all the customs that the kuffar observe, and Islam wasn't really his lifestyle, so to speak, then you could say that he's going to struggle with answering that question as well. So then this is where the qabr will then become constricted. So for the pious person, the angels opened out the qabr and opened the door of Jannah. In this person's situation, the qabr will be the opposite. It will be constricted and become so tight that his ribs will clash against each other, organs will be squashed together, etc. And then the punishment of the qabr will begin. Now, if you imagine, we can't really take any real moment of pain in this dunya. We get a little burn or we get a little scratch, etc. There's a little bit of pain, a little bit of discomfort. And obviously the more the pain, the more discomfort we get. So can you imagine that, as soon as this person goes into the qabr, what his condition is going to be like? So there is a difference obviously between the condition of a righteous person and a sinner, and that difference starts as soon as the angel of death comes and the soul is extracted. Yeah, it's not like you're going to wait till the day of judgment, the hisab will be done, and then, no, the situation starts right from the time that the ruh becomes extracted. Obviously, if you're a pious person, your ruh will come out easy, etc. If you're a bad person, or sinful person, or a disbeliever, then, as described, the ruh will come out much more difficult. So inshallah, I think we'll leave it there for today. We'll hit our 20-minute milestone. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll pick up from ayat number 4 and then continue on, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept everyone's coming together for this dars of Quran, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all tawfiq to observe our life according to the ahkam of our deen, per what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, per what Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed in his sunnah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to really recharge our hearts in this month of Ramadan. Requesting everyone to make dua for me and for the whole ummah, inshallah. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa, amma ba'd. Fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. So inshallah ta'ala we'll continue with the tafseer of Surah Naziat gharqa. So yesterday we got up to the third verse, where we were describing the various states of people and how the angels extract the ruh from them. So inshallah today we'll start from verse number 4, which is فَالسَّابِقَاتِ السَّبْقَ فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةُ تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةُ قُلُوبٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاجِفَةٌ أَبْصَارُهَا خَاشِعَةٌ يَقُولُونَ أَإِنَّا لَمَرْدُودُونَ فِي الْحَافِرَةِ وَإِذَا كُنَّا عِظَامًا نَخِرَةً. So inshallah we'll do the commentary of those verses, inshallah ta'ala. So basically, if you remember yesterday, we were discussing, as I mentioned, the angels and how they take the ruh out from the person. And then we described in a bit more detail about how that different states can be depending on the person's own behavior in their life and their a'mal. So if it was a pious person, then the ruh is ready to go, and it's very easy for the angels to take it out. And if it's a sinful person, then obviously he doesn't want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's obviously trying to basically stay in there. And obviously the angels are going to basically do their job, which is to basically grab the ruh and take it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So verse number 4 today then says, then proceed forward quickly. So here basically it refers to the angels. So this is another quality of the angels. Sabiqat basically means to race or to compete. So here basically we're trying to say that the angels are going to move forward quickly in order to take the ruh back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, it goes back to its asl destination. So they race through the skies very quickly with the ruh, and then basically as soon as they've shown the Jannah and Jahannam, then they bring the ruh back to the qabr, and then the questioning basically will start from there onwards. Prophet ﷺ mentioned in a hadith and said that the person who is buried in the grave, he hears the sound of his relatives going back after burying him. So this is a side point, that basically the ruh is put back into the body. Once the ruh is put back in the body, at that point he'll be in the qabr. When he's in the grave, in the qabr, he's able to then hear. So at that point his hearing is kind of restored to him. And this is actually why it's actually a sunnah that when you bury somebody, that you spend as much time as you can reciting Quran to them, so that this person can hear the Quran being recited and possibly make him remind him of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and make the questioning of the grave easier for him. And then also in another hadith, Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the azab, the punishment of the qabr, is haqq. Yani it's a reality and it's going to happen. And there are actually hadiths where the Prophet ﷺ himself witnessed events taking place in the qabr. Now obviously this is something from the unseen, so we can't necessarily see it, but Prophet ﷺ has seen it and has actually described the situation. So one hadith mentions that he was riding once on a horse and the horse suddenly stopped. Because animals can actually hear things like that, and the horse was becoming basically out of control. And the Prophet ﷺ said, if you could have heard what he is hearing, i.e. the horse, you would have stopped burying, because the adhab is happening in these two graves right now. And the Sahaba asked, what did they do that the horse is so afraid of them, of whatever it's hearing regarding these graves? And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that one did not clean himself well after urinating, and the other used to backbite. So again, these are, sins in and of themselves, but probably me and you would probably consider them as not very significant things. But even those sort of sins are causes of someone getting adhab in the qabr, punishment of the grave. So talking evil of somebody, backbiting, and kind of harming the honor of somebody, and then the other person basically wasn't cleansing himself properly as he's supposed to. So again, these are kind of things that we need to think about. They're not trivial things. These are serious things, because there's a consequence of those if we're not careful. So at the grave, recite as much Quran as possible, and we have the hope that obviously the person who's died, then inshallah ta'ala will make it easier for him, and he is able to kind of remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the other mas'ala that comes along with this question is about women who visit the graves. Generally our ulama say that it is disliked, it's makruh, but obviously that because it's makruh doesn't mean it's haram. And the reason the scholars give for this is that basically sometimes women can get very emotional and they can lose their patience, and obviously we don't want to be in a situation where people are losing their control and composure, especially in sort of a gathering where a lot of people are going to be there and that sort of thing. So yeah, because of that, then that's why ulama declare it kind of as a makruh. Now at the qabr, again, you can recite various surahs, Surah Yasin, Surah Mulk, etc., but any surah can be recited. And then there's another mas'ala that comes up, another question that can be asked is, what about the people that don't have a body to be buried? Because so far we're talking about somebody who's been put into the qabr, etc., and the ruh is returned to them, etc., and all that. But what about those people who don't have a body? In some faith traditions, they have a concept of cremation. So they're not necessarily burying anything, they just burn the body, and that becomes dust or whatever, and then they spread the ash around, etc. But reality is that the body is the physical component that Allah Ta'ala has given us. It's our vehicle of existence in this dunya. And the ruh is actually an existence that comes from the unseen world, the other realm, if you want to put it that way. So yes, disposing of the body, or not having a body, or cremating it, whatever, while that all can occur, but the ruh is still there. The ruh is something that we can't touch. It's not something that we can actually physically do anything with. So it's the ruh that actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's what's going to be judged essentially. So the ruh is still going to be there. So there's another side point here. So it says here that time is also going to be relative. Yeah. So there's one saying that the Day of Judgment is going to be equal to 50,000 years, and there's another saying that it's going to be the equivalent of 1,000 years. So it looks like there's some sort of contradiction in these statements. But the reality is that for some it's going to pass very quickly, time, and for others it's going to drag. Now for those people who loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and lived their life piously, etc., etc., their judgment will pass for them very quickly. So time will be relative, and time is going to be different according to the a'mal of the individual. Your deeds actually going to make a difference in terms of the time you spend, or the time at least to how you feel it's going to be. And at the Day of Judgment, a person will not know, will not be able to recall what happened to them at the time of their death. Just like when we are born, we can't recall our life in the alim arwah. So the alim arwah is a term that refers to the time before Allah Ta'ala created the world, but He created all the souls of all the creation. So if it's an ayat of the Quran where Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says, Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And then we, all the ruh that Allah Ta'ala has created at that time, we all said, yes, definitely you are our Lord. Now, if I ask anybody, do you remember that conversation? No one's going to really remember it. But the fact is, it did happen, and we were there at that time. So it is a reality that happened. So on the Day of Judgment, a person will have no recollections of the events, even of his qabr, or what fate awaits him. And it says here that the soul will enter the body again, and the person will become whole again. And people won't remember exactly what happened throughout that process. There is a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ was in Medina, and Aisha radiallahu anha met someone she instantly clicked with. Somebody she got on really well with. And sometimes you find out when you meet people, you have this instant kind of warmth to that person, and you guys get on really well. And then basically the Prophet ﷺ said to her that in the other realm, Alim Arwah, where the souls were, where Allah Ta'ala created all the souls, etc., he said that your souls were together, to Aisha radiallahu anha. So it's almost like, the fact that they were there in the past at some point, and they have this kind of instant connection there. So that's just a little side point there. Then the next verse number 5, says that then manage to do everything they are ordered to do. So mudabbirat here, dabbara, means to plan something from the word tadbir. So Allah Ta'ala is saying that the angels are only following orders, and that the soul is eventually going to its final place of resting, and is going to be either a place where the adhab will take place, and it will be like a pit of Jahannam, or it's going to be a grave which is going to be expansive, as we described earlier, and with a window of Jannah there. So the angels essentially are just planning and carrying out and doing the tasks that they've got to do. That's their job, and that's what they are going to do. Then verse number 6 is, you will be resurrected on the day when the shocking event will take place, yani the first blowing of the trumpet. And this blowing of the trumpet, it will shock everything. So here basically rajifa means to shake or tremble and blow or shake. So this is referring to the first trumpet, and then this is going to be what will cause the earth to tremble and shake. And then in the next verse number 7, says, followed by the next one, yani the second trumpet that will be blown. So this is talking about the second trumpet. So now the question is, what is the time difference between the first trumpet being blown and the second trumpet being blown? Through hadith we learn the following, that the Prophet ﷺ said that the time period between the two trumpets is 40. Now, it isn't mentioned exactly 40 what? Is it 40 years, 40,000, etc.? We don't really know in detail. Some hadiths indicate that it's 40 years, but even if it is years, the reality is, once that trumpet's blown, everything is going to be broken up, etc. How are we going to have a relative understanding of time at that point? So we probably won't even be able to tell how long it really is in reality. Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu narrates a hadith about it. So he was obviously the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, son of Abbas radiallahu anhu, and was the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now he had a very great understanding of Quran, because he was a direct student of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he puts an explanation here. He says that between the two trumpets, first is the Day of Judgment, and the second is the resurrection. And then he mentions that there will be a flood, and there will be water all over the earth. The time period will be 40 years, and the humans will start coming out of the graves, just like seeds and flowers come out after the rain. This is a time when the body and the soul will be reunited after the soul has been in barzakh. So trumpet 1 is rajifa, the one that shakes, and trumpet 2 is radifa, which is the one that follows. So that kind of gives us an indication of the time period that we're talking about here. And then in the next verse number 8, Allah Ta'ala mentions that hearts on that day will be throbbing. Yeah, yani people are going to be panicked, and it is going to be their hearts that's really going to capturing that emotion there on that day. And then in verse number 9, Allah Ta'ala mentions that on their eyes will be downcast. So abasar basically means to have eyes or vision, and this is talking about the eyes of the heart. it means that the humans, because of their guilt or their shame and their panic, they'll realize that actually how weak are we, that we are right now in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then obviously they reflect on their state, so they'll know that actually, and just like a little child when he's done something wrong and he's told off, he has that guilty look and his eyes are downcast, his head is down. It is like that kind of state you can imagine, on the Day of Judgment, that we'll go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And particularly if, our life hasn't been led in the best of, the most pious way, etc., then, there's going to be that tendency to have that guilt. And then ayat number 10, then they say, Allah Ta'ala says, they say, are we going to be brought back to our former state of life? So here it means that the original state, exactly how they were with the body and everything. And they're going to be amazed, so amazed that this is why they're even asking this question, are we really going to be brought back to how we were before? Now you imagine somebody who was born maybe 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago. All of a sudden he's been brought out of his qabr and he's standing right before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's going to be amazed that he's been brought out and it's going to be restored to his original state. And then verse number 11 elaborates even further, and it says, is it when we will have been turned into decayed bones? The body will obviously be rotten by being in the qabr, and then Allah Ta'ala is going to restore it back to its former position. So scholars mention here that the bodies of the Anbiya alayhimus salam are preserved in their graves, and one of the reasons they give behind this is because they were sinless, because prophets didn't commit sin, they were ma'soom, so their bodies are preserved. And another hadith mentions that the earth will not eat the body of a martyr as well. So it depends on how much a person has sinned as to the rate at which a body will decay. Now, some people have actually observed the statement about the martyr, the shuhada. So it actually goes back to just after the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So during the Battle of Uhud, as we may remember, 70 Sahaba became shaheed, they were martyred. And the others were extremely exhausted after the battle, and they couldn't dig up 70 graves to bury them, so they made makeshift ditches to put the bodies in. And they buried Sahaba together, radiallahu anhum ajma'een. And the Prophet ﷺ used to ask which one knew the Quran more, and he would bury that Sahabi would be buried first, etc. Then years later, in the Khilafat of the grandson of Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, there was a flood in Medina. And at that time, the people were worried that actually, because of this flooding, the graves where they buried all those shuhada may become open, whatever, and the bodies may actually come out and flow along with this flood. So they basically went in to actually reposition the bodies. Now, when they opened the graves, they saw that the shuhada were still there, exactly as if they'd just been buried yesterday, looking fresh, and they even had fresh blood flowing. And this is something that was witnessed by the people of Medina Munawwara. So as I said, it depends on how a person has lived their life that will determine kind of how their outcome will be as well. Then verse number 12 says that they say, if so, that will be a harmful return. So now again, this is people who are questioning, are we going to be brought back, even if we've been buried for so long and we're decayed? And if we are going to be brought back, then that's going to be a harmful return. So here, khasira basically means a loss. So what that essentially points to is that we're going to be given our bodies back in our original self. We're going to be at a loss because of this. Because reality is that they didn't really believe, and now they've seen the akhirah, they've actually been in their qabrs, they spent time there and potentially, experienced what they've experienced there. So now they know really that the end outcome isn't going to be very pleasant. So then for that reason, they're kind of worried that they're going to be at a loss. Then verse 13 says that, so it will be only a single harsh voice. So zajratun basically is means a scream or loud voice, and this is referring to the trumpet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that it is just one loud scream. It won't take any time at all, and you'll be raised up again in a moment. So there's not like it's going to be taking time to recreate every single creation. At that point, it's going to be an instant thing that's going to happen. As soon as that trumpet is blown, boom, everyone's going to be resurrected. Then the next ayat says, and in no time they will be brought in the plain of Hashr. So, فَإِذَا هُمْ بِالسَّاهِرَةِ. So Sahira basically means to wake up. Now sihr in Arabic also is a different word which means magic, but this isn't that word. This is spelled slightly differently. So this means to wake up. So with one scream they will be with the ones who wake up. Now what is this? There's a little bit of an ikhtilafi position about what does this actually refer to. So I'm going to give out a couple of the opinions that I've come across. So one is that this refers to our earth. All the people who are dead in their graves are now woken up, and this earth will keep them awake. Others say that this is not about the whole earth, but this is referring to the plain of resurrection, where everyone's going to be gathered. There's a narration here mentioned by Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu that says it will be shining like silver and no sin has ever been done on it. So then the question is, how is it possible that there is no place on this earth where no one has actually committed any sin? Any sins take place everywhere. People do commit sins, etc. So the majority opinion is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to bring the lowest layer in the earth and bring that out. And then this is going to be such a portion of land that there's no trees on it or anything else. And this is why it's shining. In a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, it mentions that the plain of Hashr will not have any signs of trees or mountains or oceans on it, and it will be like stretched leather, and the wrinkles will become straight. So then the question is, where is this exactly? So one opinion is that this is Baytul Maqdis, yani Masjid Aqsa. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu says it will be in Makkah where everyone will gather. And then there's a third opinion which is kind of completely different to the other two. So now basically the story in this surah changes now. Now it's going to move on to a different tangent slightly. So up till now we've described Jahannam, resurrection, and the kind of witnessing of the Day of Judgment, etc. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to move on to a little bit about Musa alayhi salam. Inshallah, I think we'll pause it here because this is quite a detailed section that I wanted to cover. So what we'll do, inshallah, we'll pick this up tomorrow from verse 15, where it starts to discuss about Musa alayhi salam. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our gathering, and inshallah ta'ala grant us all the guidance and grant us tawfiq to maximize our time in this blessed month, and requesting people to make Alhamdulillahi wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa amma ba'd. Fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Hal ataka hadithu Musa. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun ala al-mursalin. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad wa barik wa sallim. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So yesterday we reached up to the ayat number 15, which is the ayat recited at the beginning today, which is هل أتاك حديث موسى. So here basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning, did the story of Musa alayhi salam reach you? Yani this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressing the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Yani the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying this is because He wants to draw our interest and attention to this story about Musa alayhi salam. Now you may be aware that Musa alayhi salam is mentioned in many different parts of the Quran, and every time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Musa alayhi salam, it's really to show a part of his story and to give us a lesson. So you'll see that Musa alayhi salam's story is kind of mentioned in various parts of the Quran, and his life generally was quite ajib, very interesting. Even from the start, from his birth, miraculous beginning of his life, what happened, and even throughout his life. So inshallah ta'ala, what we'll do in this session is we're going to cover a little bit about the story of Musa alayhi salam. And just to give you a bit of a background and overview about that, inshallah ta'ala. So, the story of Musa alayhi salam kind of sets the scene as to what the environment was like. So, you had basically Egypt, and you had the leader of Egypt who was known as the Pharaoh or Fir'aun. And Fir'aun was basically known to be a tyrant ruler and a very oppressive king, and he would do a lot of zulm, oppression on his people, and particularly he would target the Bani Israel. So who are the Bani Israel? The Bani Israel are the children of Ya'qub alayhi salam, yani Yusuf alayhi salam and his brothers, and then obviously their offspring as well come under that banner. So they were referred to as the Bani Israel. Bani basically means children, and Israel refers to Ya'qub alayhi salam because this was one of his names. Now, you may be familiar with the Surah Yusuf, and if you've come across that surah and you've read it, you'll understand that Yusuf alayhi salam went to Egypt when he was a young boy, because he was left in a well, and then some travelers picked him up, found him and sold him as a slave in Egypt. Eventually, Yusuf alayhi salam actually becomes the minister in Egypt, and then he basically moves his family over to Egypt from where they were previously. So now you've got two types of people that live in Egypt. You have the local Egyptians, the original Egyptians that were there, and then you have the immigrants, the Muhajirun of Egypt. For a long time then, the rule of Egypt was with the immigrants, yani as the descendants of Yusuf alayhi salam and his family, etc. And then at one point down the generations, the rule went to the locals, yani an Egyptian person. And this is when the oppression begins to start against the immigrants, yani the Bani Israel. And they were basically made to be like slaves, and they were treated like slaves. So one of the rulers was this particular Fir'aun character, and during his rule, one of his ministers comes and tells him some shocking news. He tells him that, I fear that someone from the Bani Israel is going to finish your kingdom. Now obviously this was shocking news, and the king obviously feared for his seat, and he wanted to basically find out how he can try and avert the situation. Now, one thing you have to remember is, at that time in Egypt, magic was a big deal, sihr. So a lot of people were into this thing called sorcery and magic. People were entertained by it, people were amazed by it. And this minister was also happened to be a fortune teller type person. So now Fir'aun is very concerned because he doesn't want to lose his kingdom, and he thought of a strategy to try and overcome this situation. So what they concluded was that we can't actually kill all of the Bani Israel, because who are we going to have as servants to serve us and work for us? So they came to this suggestion that 1 year we'll kill a boy, and the next year we'll let whatever boys are born live, and then we'll rotate it like this. And that way, basically, we'll have some population to work with and serve us, and then the other ones we will basically kill. Now, obviously, this was a stupid sort of conclusion, because, the child that was going to be destined to take over his kingdom could be born from that group of children that were left to live, rather than the ones that were killed. But khair, this was what they decided, and this is what they actually did, unfortunately. Now, Musa alayhi salam at that time was born in the year that the boys were meant to be killed. Now, just as a side point, look at the lesson that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving here. That they can plan whatever they want to plan, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. And so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills a person to live, then no one can change that. And if Allah ta'ala wants to destroy somebody, then no one can change that either. That is going to come to pass. In fact, in a hadith, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that if all the men and jinn get together and they want to harm you, if Allah ta'ala does not want that, then no one can harm you. And similarly, if all the men and jinn were to get together to benefit you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't decree that, then they cannot benefit you. So it's very, very simple. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate planner, and whatever He decrees is what happens. So now they plan to kill every baby boy that's born. Alhamdulillah. So the baby Musa is born, and the guards get wind of the fact that a child has been born in a locality, so they actually come search the houses to try and find who this baby is, and then unfortunately try and kill the baby. Allah Ta'ala then put a thought in the heart of the mother of Musa alayhi salam. Now this is a very interesting phenomenon as well. Sometimes certain people who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yani the awliya Allah, people who have that deep connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they get this experience. It's called ilham in Arabic, or in English we would call it an inspiration. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts a thought in the heart of that person. And in this case, this is what happened with the mother of Musa alayhi salam. So she had this really strong urge and feeling in her heart, which was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that told her that she should basically take a box, put baby Musa in that box, and then put that box in the river. So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that He inspired her heart. So this was the actual wording used in the Quran. So put the baby in the box essentially, and then throw the box in the river, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to her that I will bring him back to you. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is comforting the mother of Musa that yes, do this thing. I know it's very difficult, but once you do it, I will basically make sure that Musa alayhi salam comes back to you. So she had this strong yaqeen about this thing, and she actually went ahead and did exactly that. And she put her trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, put Musa alayhi salam, the baby, in the box, and threw the box in the river. So then it mentions in the story that Musa alayhi salam had an older sister. So her mother asked the sister to go and follow the box and see where the baby ends up. So now this girl, his sister, is following the box and trying to see where it goes, and basically make sure she can find out where it ends up. In the meantime, the guards turn up, and they couldn't find any baby, obviously, because now the baby is gone. So they left. So from that perspective, they were relieved. Now here's where it gets very interesting. Fir'aun had a wife called Asiya, and she was quite beloved to Fir'aun. It just so happens that one of the miracles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put on Musa alayhi salam was that whenever somebody would look at him, they would have this deep love for him, because he was such a beautiful baby. So this was something that Allah ta'ala kind of put on the face of Musa alayhi salam. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His planning, basically made the box with the baby in it arrive at the riverbank near the palace of the Fir'aun. At that time, it just so happened that Fir'aun and his wife Asiya were taking a walk. Now they see this box, and she asks for one of the guards to go and bring the box out of the river so she can see what's in it. When she opens it, she sees the baby Musa, and instantly she falls in love with the baby. The one thing to bear in mind here is that she didn't actually have any children of her own, and obviously without having a child, she was actually very keen to have a child. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given her a baby. And Fir'aun basically loved her very much. Now even though this was the year that the baby was supposed to be killed, Fir'aun didn't want to disappoint his wife, so when she asks him about keeping the child, he kind of agrees, and they keep the baby. Now, just to reiterate the promise that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned to the mother of Musa, that He will bring the baby back to her. So now the next stage of the story happens. So now the sisters followed the baby, and she sees that it's gone to Fir'aun. And so now Fir'aun and his wife take the baby back to the palace, and the baby at some point gets hungry and starts crying. And in those days, the culture was that they would call wet nurses who would basically come and wean the baby and feed the baby. Now, every sort of wetness that is given to the baby doesn't really get accepted by the baby. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that He made the milk of every other woman haram on Musa alayhi salam. So every woman that came, he couldn't basically be weaned by her. And now it's getting to a situation where, they're all worried for the baby's survival because he's not taking milk from anybody. So now here the sister comes in, and she mentions to Fir'aun that I know of a woman who had a baby last year, and she can feed him. And this is not a lie. So this was referring to Harun alayhi salam, who is the brother of Musa alayhi salam. And that was the year that the baby was not meant to be, was not decreed to be killed. So she was quite comfortable in telling them that the baby was born that year. So now she mentions that this baby is already being breastfed by this lady, so she can easily take on Musa alayhi salam as well and feed him as well. So now the real mother of Musa alayhi salam comes, and Musa alayhi salam starts feeding. So now everybody's happy. Fir'aun is happy and his wife is happy that, okay, alhamdulillah, we found somebody who's going to be able to feed our child. So they ask the mother of Musa alayhi salam to stay in the palace and feed him and stay there and look after him, etc. But the mother of Musa alayhi salam's trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was such that she refused to stay in the palace, and she said, I'm going to go and stay in my own house. So now look what happens, subhanallah. Fir'aun agrees and says, take the baby, that's fine, and we'll even give you a salary for your work that you're going to do, yani, for feeding him and looking after him. So now not only does she get the baby back, she also gets a salary, some money, and she's able to feed her own baby through that process. So now Musa alayhi salam comes back, and now he's secure and safe living with his mother, and he's now actually secure and safe from the army of Fir'aun as well, because now he's now considered the adopted son of the Pharaoh. Now he starts to get older, and he starts to reach a stage where he's actually eating solid foods, etc. And now he actually goes back into the palace, and he's actually raised up in the palace, and he grows up to be a very strong man. Now Musa alayhi salam kind of remembers his roots, and he has actually a very soft spot for the Bani Israel, because he is from amongst them, and he's not a local Egyptian. Now here's the situation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to test him. So now he is out in the locality, and he sees two people fighting in front of him. One is from Bani Israel and the other is a local Egyptian. Musa alayhi salam sympathizes with the Bani Israel, and he tries to basically intervene in this fight and break the fight up, and tries to push away the Egyptian. So while all this scuffle was happening, in self-defense, he kind of punches this Egyptian person, and he has such strength that he actually kills the man accidentally. Wow, what a punch, subhanAllah. He was able to basically kill him just through his own strength. So the next day, he sees two people fighting again, and this time he thinks perhaps nobody knows that I was involved in the previous fight, so he tries to go and intervene again. And this time the Egyptian person that was in that fight says to him, are you going to do the same thing again? And now he gets worried that, okay, this guy recognizes me, and perhaps basically there's going to be consequences if people find out that I was involved in that fight yesterday and that I'd killed somebody. Now, the reason why this was the case was that there was a law in the land at that time that if somebody kills a person by accident, then the punishment is that they will actually get the death penalty. So he now thinks that, okay, it's better for me to leave this place and go somewhere else. Now, even though we could argue that it was actually accidental that he'd killed this other person, but the fact is that the law was very strict, so it wouldn't matter if it was accidental or not, he would potentially have been given the death penalty. So now he decides to leave Egypt, and he goes to a place called Madian. Now this incident is also mentioned in some detail, so I'll try and elaborate a little bit, inshallah ta'ala, just to get the background in front of you guys. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at times sends prophets to various different places. Now in our time, when Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, he came to Makkah Mukarramah, but he was basically for all of the peoples at that time. He was there for everybody. He wasn't specific to a person or a place or a tribe or anything like that. But in previous times, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes sent Anbiya alayhimus salam, he could have sent them to a certain tribe or a certain area. And sometimes you could have 2 or 3 prophets living in a different area but in the same time. And this is one of those situations. So when Musa alayhi salam leaves Egypt, he goes to a place called Madian. Now in Madian, there was actually a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whose name was Shu'aib alayhi salam. Now Shu'aib alayhi salam had 2 daughters, and he himself was quite old at this time. Now Musa alayhi salam arrives in Madian, and the first thing he does is he goes to a place where there's water, and probably to quench his thirst, etc. And he sees that there's a group of men at the watering place, And then he also notices that there are two girls waiting to the side and they're not coming forward. Now the Quran mentions things very, very concisely. And remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only mentions things, those things that He wants to mention. Yani the things that He wants us to know about, to think about, and to be aware of. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in detail that these were two girls that were there and the behavior of those girls. Yani they were shy and they were sitting well away from the group of men that were also at the well. So Allah ta'ala is kind of indicating to us that these are the attributes and the behaviors of noble women. Yani this is showing us their modesty. And Musa alayhi salam notices that they're waiting, and then he asks them if he can help. So now what do they say? The first thing they do is they kind of set the scene so he understands their situation. So he says that, they say to him that our father is actually very old, and this is why we have had to come ourselves rather than our father. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran so that women can learn to speak to men, etc. And they were making sure that this man knows we are not here for fun and we're not just hanging around inappropriately, but because it's our father's age, etc., and he's not able to come, we're having to come ourselves and collect the water. So Musa alayhi salam helps them. He goes, fetches the water, and then he says to them that he will take it back to their house for them. Now this is also very interesting, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the details of how Musa alayhi salam brings the water back. He says to the women that I will walk in front of you and you guys walk behind me. And this is because he doesn't want his eyes to fall on these women at any point. So this is just his own nature of modesty. So he walks ahead and then they walk behind, and then they kind of tell him and navigate to him left, right, etc., and tell him how to get to their house. There, basically, he arrives at the house, and then he actually meets Shu'aib alayhi salam. And Musa alayhi salam tells him his whole story, what happened in Egypt and how he left and how he's now arrived in Madian. And he's asking now as well that if there's any work that he can do, then let him know, and he will try and help out and do some work, etc. So then he basically leaves after dropping the water off, and then the girls basically tell their father about Musa alayhi salam and how he behaved and how he was helpful, etc. So much so that Shu'aib alayhi salam actually goes out and calls him back. And then he gives him a proposition. He says to him, marry one of my daughters and stay here for some time, for some years, and then you can go and do whatever you want after that point. So this is going to help me because I'm old, and it will help you because you want to stay away from Egypt, so this will be a good solution for you as well. So Musa alayhi salam accepts this proposal and actually marries one of the daughters of Shu'aib alayhi salam. Now, remember at this point here, up until this point, Musa alayhi salam is not actually a prophet. He's not received nubuwwat at this point. Yeah, and Shu'aib alayhi salam is known as a prophet. So Musa alayhi salam at this point isn't a prophet, but Shu'aib alayhi salam is a prophet. So at this time, the other interesting fact is that they actually believed in one God, and there wasn't any form of idol worship going on, etc. And the people, however, one thing that was of concern in that area was that the people were scared of Fir'aun. And they knew that this guy was an oppressor, so they were quite fearful of him. And all the laws that he had passed in that area were basically all the laws of Fir'aun. But from a dini perspective, from a religious aspect, they were still following the religion of Yusuf alayhi salam. So now Musa alayhi salam lives in Madian for a period of about 10 years before he decides that he wants to go back home. So now he basically leaves Madian and starts making his way to Egypt with his wife. Now at this point, very interestingly, she's actually expecting a baby at this point when they're on their way back, or started their journey back to Egypt. Now at this point, he's trying to find some sort of directions to get back, and he's looking for people or a caravan that can actually try and direct him. And on the way back, it's mentioned in the narrations that it was very cold, and obviously because he's traveling with his wife, she needs to take rest every so often because of her condition. So now he goes searching to see if he can find somebody to help him or guide him. He notices a light on top of a mountain. Now this then second, or the further elaboration of this is now mentioned in more detail in the Quran in the following verses. So just to kind of wrap up here, so basically they reached this valley called Tuwa, and there in the valley there's a mountain called Sina or Sinai. So inshallah ta'ala, we're going to continue from tomorrow inshallah from this point in verse 16, where we'll go into the whole qissa of how Musa alayhi salam converses with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our gathering here, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us tawfiq to maximize our time in this blessed month of Ramadan, requesting everyone for du'as as well. And inshallah ta'ala we'll speak tomorrow. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah ta'ala everybody's in good health and iman. So inshallah ta'ala we're going to continue our reading tafseer of Surah Naziat gharqa. So inshallah ta'ala, yesterday we got up to the part where Musa alayhi salam, at this time is not a prophet, but he decides to go back to Egypt, and this time he's married, he's got his wife with him. They're traveling through the land, and they were trying to find somebody to give them some guidance as to which way to go, etc. And Musa alayhi salam gets his wife to rest on the side of the road, and then he basically sees a light on top of the mountain. So he decides to go there because it may be that there's people there he can ask and get some help from them. So inshallah ta'ala, today's ayat read inshallah ta'ala. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذ ناداه ربه بالوادي المقدس طوى اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى فقل هل لك إلى أن تزكى وأهديك إلى ربك فتخشى فأراه الآية الكبرى فكذب وعصى ثم أدبر يسعى فحشر فندى فقال أنا ربكم الأعلى فأخذه الله نكال الآخرة والأولى سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So at this point he's reached the valley of Tuwa, and he's reached the mountain specifically, which is called Sina or Sinai in English. Now basically this verse 16 says when his Lord called him, which is إِذْ نَادَاهُ رَبُّهُ بِالْوَادِ الْمُقَدَّسِ طُوَى. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to this place as Muqaddas, yani sanctified, holy or special. And the reason is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually going to speak to Musa alayhi salam here in this place. And this is where, he will actually converse and get the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now this is also called Mount Tur, which basically means a green mountain. So this is Tur Sina, which is another common name that you may come across. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kind of enables him to see some light at the mountain, and that's why he basically is drawn to that light and comes to the mountain to see if there's any people there to help him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that he was going to the mountain to seek help for his wife. And some basic ulama say that this is one of the reasons a person does khidmat, and then the result of that khidmat is that they get some sort of blessing in return of it. So here Musa alayhi salam was obviously taking care of his wife, said to her, sit down, rest, let me go and see if I can find some resources, some people to try and help us in our journey, etc. So he comes to the mountain, and then he realizes that actually there's no light there, and in fact there's nobody else there either. So then the ayat describes where his Lord called him. Now, so Mufassirin answer the question of what is this call? Because it's obviously a bit ajib, right? That they hear a voice on a mountain, and if it's referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is that? And what does it sound like? So it says here that Musa heard a voice, and the voice said, Musa, you are entering a sacred place, so take off your shoes. Now here you can imagine Musa alayhi salam is very astonished. There's nobody there, yet he's hearing a voice. Now remember, he's not a prophet at this point. Yeah, it's just very important to remember. He's not been given nubuwwat, so he doesn't know these type of things that happen that might be familiar to a prophet. So he takes his shoes off. Now some of the Mufassirin write, why did Musa alayhi salam take his shoes off there then? So one of the opinions is that it's a sign of humility because he's honoring a place that is sacred. And there's another opinion that says that this place is going to become sacred because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to grant Musa alayhi salam nubuwwat here, and there'll be a lot of barakat there, a lot of blessings. And Allah ta'ala wants Musa alayhi salam's skin to touch the bare earth, and that way it will kind of be a source of blessing. So the second question is, what kind of voice did Musa alayhi salam actually hear then? Because obviously we as human beings can't see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we can't directly interact with Allah ta'ala in a face-to-face type of thing. So how is it that Musa alayhi salam was able to hear the voice? So what the Mufassirin have written is that it's not like the voice that me and you hear. Allah's voice cannot be comprehended like a human voice, and there's no direction to the voice. It was something that was totally all around him, and he wasn't hearing it just through his ears, but they write that he was actually hearing it through his whole body. So it wasn't like what we would call a human voice. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Musa that I am Allah and I am your Rabb, yani your Lord, and you are going to be made a prophet. So now this is the point at which he's getting his prophecy and he's getting his nubuwwah. Now, bear in mind his wife is not with him. She is still where he left her, below the mountain. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him nubuwwat, makes him a prophet. And then in the next ayat, Allah ta'ala actually gives him a job description. So now he's given him the task of being a prophet. Now he's actually going to give him the instruction of what he needs to do. Now he's become a prophet. So the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذْهَبْ إِلَىٰ فِرْعَوْنَ إِنَّهُ طَغَىٰ. So Allah Ta'ala is saying, go to Fir'aun. Indeed, he has crossed the limit. And then Allah Ta'ala says, in verse 18, فَقُلْ هَلْ لَكَ إِلَىٰ أَن تَزَكَّى. And that say, you will purify yourself. And then Allah Ta'ala mentions, وَأَهْدِيَكَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَتَخْشَى. Then it says, and I will guide you towards your Lord so that you fear. And you could become fearful. Now, the wording used here is tazakka. Now, tazakka is also the word that kind of is derived for zakat. Now, zakat, what does zakat do? Zakat is a means to clean. It is a way of purifying our wealth. That's why we give zakat, because Allah Ta'ala says, give 2.5% of your wealth in charity, because this is a source of purification for your wealth. And tazakka means to purify your own self. So now basically Musa alayhi salam is being sent to be a guide to Fir'aun. And generally speaking, a person can't do their own kind of self-purification. They need someone to guide them along the way. So now here you have a situation where a person is guided towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once a person begins to be guided, he gets that natural awe and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gets that taqwa inside of him. And then he realizes that there is a greater being that I have to answer to. So for a normal person, this would be the situation that once they get the guidance and they start acting upon what they've been told and they develop that taqwa in their heart, etc., they become, generally speaking, more humble and kind of more pious. In the situation of Fir'aun, he had a lot of arrogance. Yeah, if you remember that he was also quite a zalim, quite an oppressive sort of ruler. He was oppressing the Bani Israel, etc., looking down upon them, seeing them as lower than himself. So the issue then is that when you have a person with such arrogance and such kind of self-love in their heart, telling them to follow somebody else is going to be extremely difficult because their heart just won't accept it. Yeah? Now, arrogance is a deadly disease, as we know, right? It's a disease that actually can literally kill the heart and create so much darkness in the heart. So if Fir'aun was to try and purify himself, he would be able to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he'd have to get rid of all of his arrogance. And that, for a person who's got a lot of arrogance, they don't generally see themselves as having arrogance, and then to try and tell them to get rid of it is a very big task. So the scholars say that the first step to purifying oneself is basically to remove arrogance. Because if a person always assumes that they're correct and that nobody else's opinion matters and what they say goes, then they're not going to listen to anybody and they're not going to basically heed the advices that are given to them. So this is like step number 1 on the journey of getting your rectification and purification done. So now here Musa alayhi salam knows that I've got to go and speak to this type of person. And he's obviously naturally feeling a little bit scared because he knows the power and arrogance of Fir'aun. But he also knows that he's been given nubuwwat and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told him that he has a job of now going to Fir'aun and fixing this disease that he has in his heart. And to tell him that there is actually somebody or another being that's more powerful than him and that he isn't actually that powerful as he thinks he is. Now the Mufassirin have written there's something very interesting, a sort of side sort of story here. That there was a situation once when Musa alayhi salam was a baby. At that time Fir'aun had some doubts about Musa alayhi salam as a child. And obviously he brought him into his house just to kind of please his wife. And one of his ministers came to him and said, let's test this baby. He said, let us present him with a burning coal, a red hot kind of burning hot coal, and let's put some gold on the other side. So there's 2 choices now for this child to grab one of those 2 things. So the minister says, if he's a normal child, he will reach out for the coal because it glows and it will be looking attractive to the child. And if he is a gifted child, a gifted baby, then he will not reach for the coal, but rather he'll go for the gold. So Musa alayhi salam, as we know, was gifted. So he actually wouldn't pick the coal and rather he reached for the gold. So at this point Jibreel alayhi salam came and forced Musa alayhi salam to pick up the coal. Now Musa alayhi salam picked up the red hot coal and he actually bit into it. And this actually caused some damage to his tongue. Now seeing all of this, the Fir'aun became a bit more relaxed and actually after that incident didn't really suspect anything of Musa alayhi salam after that. But because of this incident, this caused Musa alayhi salam's tongue to become a bit defective and he had a stammer or was at a speech impediment. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him to go to Fir'aun, Musa alayhi salam said, I cannot even speak clearly. So now Musa alayhi salam makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, Ya Allah, make my brother Harun a prophet also. Now remember, Harun isn't with him here. He's still back in Egypt. So he's not here in this situation, in this incident. So he says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that make him a prophet too, then I'll have some support with me and we will both do your dhikr and carry out your task. Now there's also a very famous dua that Musa alayhi salam made that's actually recorded in the Quran, which is Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. So this is a dua that kind of says something along the lines of, open the knot of my tongue so I can speak clearly to Fir'aun. So Harun alayhi salam is also now made a prophet and he gets wahi that you have been made a prophet. So now Harun alayhi salam, as I mentioned, is already in Egypt and gets this revelation that he's now a prophet, and then Musa alayhi salam actually gets his speech cleared up. And now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants Musa alayhi salam 2 accepted du'as. And in the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in verse 20, فَأَرَاهُ الْآيَةَ الْكُبْرَى. So then he showed him the big sign. Now, this is very interesting. Every prophet was given miracles, which were something that was already prevalent in the society, but this miracle was actually an exceptional form of that thing. So to put that into some context, if you imagine in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, poetry was very, very popular. People were known by their poetry and eloquence of language. And when the Prophet ﷺ was given the revelation of the Quran was given in such eloquent Arabic that it actually made the poets speechless. And in fact, some poets would even say things like, this is not the words of a human being. Now, we obviously don't understand the Arabic language and we can't really relate to what they mean by that, but for somebody who does understand the eloquence and the fasih and baligh kind of manner of the Arabic language will know that the Quran is written in a very particular way. And even to that even the challenge of the time of the Prophet ﷺ was that Allah Ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, in Surah Baqarah, that if you have doubts about the Quran, then bring a verse like it. So that challenge was laid out for over 1400 years ago, and to this day, that challenge is still there. Yani nobody's been able to repeat, mimic or imitate a verse like the Quran. So this is again a miracle in and of itself that we have with our Prophet ﷺ. So that was his miracle. Then if you look at the Isa alayhi salam, in his time, people were very much into medicines and treatments and that kind of thing. And Isa alayhi salam, the miracle that he was given was to bring the ability to bring dead back to life and to cure the blind. So now, if you go back into time and look at Musa alayhi salam's time, in his time, magic and hypnotism was very common. So this type of hypnotism was the kind of magic that was to do with illusions. They would actually have shows and entertainments dealing with illusions. So it wasn't the black magic type of thing, if that makes sense. So the first thing that Musa alayhi salam finds is that excuse me, alhamdulillah, if he puts his hand in his armpit and takes it out, then the arm would shine like a very bright light. So this was one miracle that he was given. And the second miracle that he was given, which isn't mentioned in this ayats that we read, but in other parts of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that Musa alayhi salam used to have a staff, which he would walk with and he would tend to his sheep, etc. And then basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned to him that throw down your staff. And when he threw down the staff, it became a snake. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then basically told him to pick up the staff, the snake, and not to fear from the snake. So when he picked it up, it returned back to its original form. Yani it was back to a staff. So these were the two kind of miracles that he was given. So when he got to Fir'aun, he showed the hand miracle and then he showed the stick as well. Yani he was saying that, look, Fir'aun, you're not that big a deal. Yeah, Tika, you might think you're powerful and everything, but you're not really all that. So this is what I can do, and none of your magicians or your ministers can do anything like this. So, you're not that powerful. So then in the next verse, it describes then the situation of Fir'aun. So it says here, فَكَذَّبَ وَعَصَّى. Yeah, so Fir'aun, denied that it was a miracle and he disobeyed. ثُمَّ أَدْبَرَ يَسْعَى. Then he turned back and he struggled. And here what it means is that now that he's shocked by what he sees from Musa alayhi salam about his two miracles, that he wants to actually plan something to combat this and kind of prove that Musa alayhi salam is wrong. So then he tries to struggle in trying to find a way to kind of disprove what Musa alayhi salam had showed him. Then verse 23 says, فَحَشَرَ فَنَدَى, which means basically then he gathered the people and he called. And he was trying to call all his ministers and his magicians, etc. And then he says in verse 24, which is quite a shocking line, he says, فَقَالَ أَنَا رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى. So Fir'aun says, then he said, I am your Lord Most High. So this is the level of arrogance that he had. He said, he went to such a level of arrogance that he actually began to describe himself as God. I am your Lord. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in verse 25, فَأَخَذَهُ اللَّهُ نَكَالُ الْآخِرَةِ وَالْأُولَى. That Allah held him with punishment of the akhirah and the first, meaning dunya. So Allah ta'ala mentions the akhirah first because that is the one that can't be avoided. Then in the next ayat he says, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَعِبْرَةً لِمَنْ يَخْشَى. Which means, indeed in that, the story of Musa is surely a lesson, ibrah, for whoever fears. So if you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is a lesson. But if you have an ounce of arrogance and you don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you won't take any lesson from this. Then what happened after that? He called his magicians basically to prove that this is no miracle and anyone could do that. So Fir'aun is now basically trying to disprove the miracles of Musa alayhi salam. So you have to imagine that Fir'aun being the ruler, he had access to a lot of ministers, a lot of people, a lot of specialists, a lot of magicians, etc. So now he's called all of them together and he's basically told them that we need to disprove Musa alayhi salam's miracles. So what he does is he actually arranges a competition between his magicians and Musa alayhi salam. And this is where the staff becomes a snake, and then that staff that becomes a snake actually goes up and swallows up all the magicians' snakes. And then they realize that he is the one on the truth, and then they actually become the followers of Musa alayhi salam. So all the magicians that Fir'aun had now recognize Musa alayhi salam as being truthful, and they actually become the followers of Musa alayhi salam. Now, one thing to note is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows examples of His power in 3 different ways throughout the Quran. One of the questions raised will be how we are created. Then look at your surroundings. Yeah, so this is again about the notion about, observing things, reflecting on things, looking at the signs around you, the obvious things like, the sun, how is the sun created, the moon, etc. And then the third way in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows things is of mentioning of stories of the past. What happened to this nation, what happened to that nation. So the Quran is littered with various different stories of different prophets. And the reason why they're mentioned again is all to kind of give us insights into things that happened in previous nations, faults that they did, and then the consequences of those faults in a way to actually teach us that, don't repeat these errors, because these are things that they were guided about, they rejected their guidance, and then they were basically punished for their transgressions. So inshallah ta'ala we'll leave it here for today. We'll pick up from verse 27 tomorrow. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant acceptance to our coming together for this dars, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to take benefit of this month of Ramadan. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah we'll start in a minute. الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أأنتم أشد خلقا أم السماء بناها رفع سمكها فسواها وأغطش ليلها وأخرج ضحاها والأرض بعد ذلك ضحاها أخرج منها ماءها ومرعاها والجبال أرساها متاعا لكم ولأنعامكم فإذا جاءت الطامة الكبرى يوم يتذكر الإنسان ما سعى سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So inshallah ta'ala we'll continue with going through Surah Naziat. So yesterday we kind of completed the story of Fir'aun and Musa alayhi salam in that his struggle to try and convince Fir'aun and Fir'aun's kind of combating what Musa alayhi salam was trying to convey. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we mentioned about how Allah ta'ala shows things, His power in different ways in the Quran. So one that we mentioned is that He mentions about how we were created. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions, look at your surroundings, how is the things around you, the sun, the moon, how are these things created, etc. And then the third thing we mentioned was that the stories of the past. What happened to previous nations? What were their transgressions and what were the consequences of those transgressions? And again, it's a way of kind of teaching us, how to kind of make sure that we don't kind of make the same mistakes they did. So now Allah Ta'ala is again showing us His power, His knowledge and His might in these following verses. So the first verse that I read was أَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمِ السَّمَاء بَنَاهَا. Basically means, are you more difficult in creating, or is the sky more difficult? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one who made the sky. So Allah Ta'ala is giving us a comparison here, putting things like the sun, the size of it, the moon, the stars, and everything that's in the sky basically, and saying that, what's the big deal? If I've made the sun, if I've made the moon, the sky, the stars, everything you see when you look up, I'm the one who put that together. I'm the one who's elevating the sky above you. I'm the one who's placing the sun there. I've placed the moon there. Each has its own rotation. In the night the stars come out. So if I've built all of that, and that in and of itself is miraculous by itself, because it's something that we can't do ourselves at all. This is something that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do. Then if I've done all of that, then what's the big deal in creating you? Yeah, so there's no, creating you is nothing compared to, the fact that I created all these things. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, رَفَعَ سَمْكَهَا فَصَوَّاهَا. Basically means, and He has raised its roof and then balanced it. So samak here means the roof or ceiling. So in another place in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the sky has pillars. And if you look at the structure of the sky, it is actually in layers. And then they're acting like a ceiling for us. You have the ozone layer that gives us our protection from harmful rays of the sun. And it acts like what a roof does in our house. It protects us from the elements. So likewise here, the sky is essentially protecting us from harmful elements. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that He's balanced it over us to protect us from every side. So this sky that Allah ta'ala put out there, it's protecting us. Then Allah Ta'ala mentions in verse 29, وَأَغْتَشَ لَيْلَهَا وَأَخْرَجَ ضُحَاهَا, which basically means that, and darkened its night and brought out its daylight. So again, this is very miraculous if you think about it. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has set the sun and moon in a rotation. So the sun comes out, and the sky becomes bright, and daylight, penetrates through the clouds. And then if you think about it, what are all the benefits that we get from that? The benefit of the light itself. And then, at night the sun goes away, basically dips down, and the moon comes out. So then that in and of itself has its own benefit. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again is just describing some of these blessings that we're getting. And then in the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ ضُحَاهَا. And then He took out, and the earth after that, He's saying that He created the earth after that and spread it, ضُحَاهَا. Then Allah Ta'ala mentions, أَخْرَجَ مِنْهَا مَاءَهَا وَمَرْعَاهَا. So basically means that He took out from it its water and its vegetation, greenery. Then Allah Ta'ala goes on to mention, وَالْجِبَالَ أَرْسَاهَا. Then He says that He put the mountains there and established the mountains on the earth. Then why is Allah Ta'ala telling us all this? Right, so He's mentioned about Him creating the sky, and then the rotation of the sun and the moon, and then the night and day, and then basically the fact that water comes down, and then through the water coming down, vegetation comes out, and then there's mountains there that are established in the mountain in the earth. Why is Allah Ta'ala telling us all this? So the answer to that is in the next verse. Allah Ta'ala mentions مَتَاعًا لَكُمْ وَلِأَنْعَامِكُمْ. He says benefit for you, mata'an, and for your animals. We benefit from all of these things, and then not only us as humans, but even the animals benefit from it. SubhanAllah, everything Allah Ta'ala has created for us is something that we can benefit from. So Allah is telling us why He has created this whole system. If you think about it, the sun comes out, it shines, its light goes onto the plants. They grow. When the water comes down, they get nourished from it, they grow, and then eventually you get, if it's vegetable type of crops, you'll get vegetation coming out, and that's something that you benefit from. Then in the next verse, Allah Ta'ala mentions, فَإِذَا جَاءَتِ الطَّامَّةُ الْكُبْرَى. Which basically means that, and so when the great calamity comes. And what the calamity being referred to here is the Day of Judgment, essentially. Then Allah Ta'ala mentions, يَوْمَ يَتَذَكَّرُ الْإِنسَانُ مَا سَعَى. Yeah, the day insan, mankind will remind himself of what he struggled in. So here basically you'll see that the person on that day will recognize, what is it that he was working for all his life? What did he struggle for in the dunya? Now, was his struggle for just earning money, or was it for things like getting ready for his prayers and that kind of thing? Or was his struggle really about, having the high life, lots of money, status, etc.? Or was it for his deen? Everyone's got their own struggle. You got guys who are just for the deen, and you got guys for the dunya, and then you got people in between. So each person basically on that day will basically then reflect on their state in terms of what they struggled for. But you have to ask yourself, what is it that we are struggling for the most? And this is something that, again, when we read the Quran, when there's questions like these are being asked, or when Allah Ta'ala is mentioning these points, these are the kind of things that we need to take stock of for ourselves as well. Don't just assume that, sometimes verses may be addressing the disbelievers and stuff like that, but sometimes those questions are equally applicable to us. When, like this ayat we're reading just now, Allah Ta'ala is saying that the person will be reminding himself of what he struggled in. Ask ourselves, what are we struggling in? What is our struggle? What is our focus? What is our goal? What is our purpose in life? Do we have a goal even? Do we know what we're aiming for? And the thing is, if a person has a plan of action and tries to strive and struggle for something, then he takes certain steps to achieve the goal. If a person doesn't have that, then it's kind of like floating in the wind, right? You're kind of going with whichever way the wind is kind of floating. So, think about these points that Allah Ta'ala mentions in these ayat and apply it to ourselves, so we can make sure that, we're focusing, and if not, reassessing what we're doing, to make sure that we're actually doing what we need to be doing and avoiding what we need to be avoiding as well. So in other words, the consequence of this ayat is that, people are going to get flashbacks and see their whole life in front of them. But obviously at that time, you can't do anything. It's too late. So really, now that we are in this dunya right now, for us, this is a point of reflection to say, okay, we need to think about what we're doing and take corrective action if necessary. Then the next verse, Allah Ta'ala mentions, وَبُرِّزَتِ الْجَحِيمُ لِمَنْ يَرَى. So Al-Jahim will be presented for the one who sees. So it means that some people will not see Jahim and others will be made to see Jahim. What is Jahim? These are referring to the 7 levels of Jahannam. 7 gates, actually. Just like Jannah has 7 doors and 7 levels, the lightest level in Jahannam, the lightest level is called Jahannam, and the second level is called Latho, and then there's basically other names that have been given to the various levels. So sometimes Jahannam is just used to mean the whole concept of hellfire or hell. And Allah Ta'ala has mentioned all of these names of Jahannam in the Quran. So sometimes Allah Ta'ala refers to hell, but is using different names. And so these names of the 7 levels are kind of being referred to here. So then when Allah Ta'ala mentions, when Allah Ta'ala says presented, it means that they will be readily be thrown in here. Yeah. So Jahim will be presented for the one who sees. So it could mean that the person who was really sinful is made to see it, and then basically will actually be thrown into it. But Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is then telling us in the next few verses how to be successful and what will take the person to Jahannam. So here Allah Ta'ala has given us now the indicators that we need to look out for. So verse 37 then, فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى. So as for those who transgress, yani crossing the boundaries of the Sharia, doing things that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala doesn't like us to do and told us to stay away from. And then the next verse, وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا, and he preferred the worldly life. Now there's a hadith in a book called Zad al-Talibin, which is a collection of hadith, which mentions that the love of dunya is the root cause of every sin. Yeah, so the love of dunya is the root cause of every sin. So what does love of dunya mean? Just to elaborate here, what does the love of dunya mean? Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have good things, right? People often have this misunderstanding that you can't have good things, you have to live like a pauper, and that means you're humble and you're pious. No. Having love of dunya means that while you have all these things, material things, you don't have love for those things in the heart. That's what actually love of dunya means, that the love for those things is not permeated in the heart. So you can have a nice house, nice car, etc. But so long as you don't have this kind of cling-on feeling to it, then it's fine. Now, some people get a new car, but then they're very restless. Wherever they park it, they have this panic about them. They're kind of constantly worried about their car. But reality is, that's a sign that that person has deep love of that thing in the heart. So we want to be away from that kind of thing. Now, Allah Ta'ala has made it natural for us to love things. We've got a heart, and naturally when we have something nice, there's an inclination towards that thing. In fact, Allah Ta'ala even mentions things like, branded horses in the Quran, and also mentions things like love for gold and silver in the Quran. Now, obviously, these are examples that were relatable to people of that time in Arabia, at that time when the Quran was being revealed. So Allah Ta'ala uses examples that are relevant so people can understand what they're being, in their context. But reality is, we use these things and just say Alhamdulillah. Once it's gone, it's gone. We don't get hung up over it. Another sign is, if you have a precious thing and it breaks, then what is your reaction? If you kind of feel really sorry for it and it kind of really is hurting your heart about it, then that means that maybe you had a bit too much attachment to it, and probably not. That was probably not a good thing. So love of dunya, in a nutshell, then is something that's considered as a spiritual disease, and we want to basically make sure that we don't have that in our hearts. So we don't have any major attachment to a dunya, basically, is the conclusion of that point. Now, again, we want to, our focus and our goal is basically to work for the akhirah. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is doing everything we can to attain our hereafter and make sure that's the best way. And oftentimes that means, spending your money, the wealth that Allah has given you, rather than holding it, spend it. So give it in charity, family, wherever you can find places to give. Now's the ideal time, month of Ramadan. There's a lot of places where people are in need, so try and help them where you can. Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith that a mu'min is he who loves for the other person what he loves for himself. So we should have this consideration and concern for others. In fact, my Shaykh often mentions that, we need to be people who are selfless. Yeah, so we don't think about ourselves first, we put others first, and then think about ourselves afterwards. Okay, so next verse then, verse 39, Allah Ta'ala mentions, فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. So indeed the Jahim is their abode. So for who? So this is for the one who has transgressed and prefers the worldly life. So now, the next verse, Allah Ta'ala mentions what are the qualities of the people of Jannah. So very interesting. Allah Ta'ala mentions, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. So that's verse 40 and 41 together. So it means here that basically for whoever fears the station of his Lord, he stops himself from his hawa, his desires. So maqam basically means a place of standing, or the station of somebody, the status of someone. So here it means that a person who fears the station of his Lord, he knows that he's going to have to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at one point in time, and he fears that actually, how am I going to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Just like a child who's done something wrong, and he knows that he's going to have to go and stand in front of his parents, he's going to be kind of really scared and worried. Just like that, a person, a believer who kind of recognizes that he's going to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has that awe of Allah ta'ala. And when he has that awe, then generally he will avoid doing things that will embarrass him in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah, the famous scholar, his classical scholar, used to say that don't look at whether a sin is big or small. Don't look at the size of a sin, if it's big or small, but look at the person you are disobeying, or the being you are disobeying. How big is he? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is all about who you're standing in front of. So, It's a trap that people fall into about major sins, minor sins, etc. No, if the word sin can relate to the action that's being done, then you want to be away from that sin and make sure that we're abstaining from it. So what does it mean that he stops himself from his desires? This person tries to crush his desires and make sure that he doesn't basically step outside the bounds of Sharia. Now, here's an interesting hadith. Prophet ﷺ mentioned that there are three things that are enough to destroy you: following your desires, stinginess, and self-praise. Yeah, all of these are what I would say is spiritual diseases that people can have, and obviously we want to make sure we don't have. Now, the Mufassirin say that there are 3 steps of stopping your desires to achieve success in the Akhirah. So these are very important points. 1, that a person prohibits himself from false faith, Aqidah, basically having the right beliefs. So beliefs in terms of what the Deen stipulates is a correct belief needs to be learned, and we need to make sure that we have that correct. Number 2 is keeping away from sins, and then anything that's also doubtful. Yeah. So as soon as you think of a sin, obviously we want to make sure we stop and don't commit the sin as best as we can. And then like that, if there's anything that's doubtful, then stay away from that as well. Because the halal is very clear, the haram is very clear, and then there's this shaded grey area in the middle. We want to basically stay away from that as well if we can. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ mentions in a hadith that a person's iman is saved from the one who stays away from even the doubtful things. So this means, in other words, anything that's classified by the fuqaha as being makruh, it's not haram, but it's considered disliked, then even stay away from those things is better for us. And then Prophet ﷺ also mentioned in a hadith that it is like a shepherd who is grazing his sheep very close to the boundary. There is a chance that they might cross the boundary. So in other words, you want to stay away from the grey area so you don't slip and go into haram territory, basically. So in the matter of dunya, if you think about the way we live our lives, we always take a precautious approach. So for example, if you invite people to your house for dinner, you're going to cook extra food because you know that you don't want to basically be running out of food and embarrassing yourself and putting them into an awkward situation. Like that also when we travel, at least I do when I travel, I always pack extra things just in case, my travel gets delayed or something else happens, and I've got enough clothes and everything else that will cover me for that extra period. So just like that, we want to do the same in terms of our deen. We want to make sure that we err on the side of caution and stay well within those things that we know are halal, and stay away from things that might be makruh. And we don't want to fall into the trap of nitpicking and saying, well, okay, this is a sunnah thing and this is a nafil thing and this is a fard thing, etc. Just stay with what you know and what's halal, and stay away from that which is doubtful to be safe. Then in verse 41, inshallah, we'll try and finish this surah today. So we've got a few ayats left. So then the next ayat is فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. Then indeed Jannah will become the final abode. So this is now the result of a person who stays on the right path and basically makes sure he stays away from doubtful matters, etc. So now remember the issue that the Makkans had. Yeah. So just going back to the original start of the surah about the whole concept of the Day of Judgment and the fact that the Makkans didn't believe in this life in the hereafter. For them, you lived and that was your life, and then in the hereafter there's nothing. Whereas obviously our deen teaches us that actually the life here is very short and the hereafter is permanent. So here basically what's being mentioned now in the next few ayats is about the whole concept of the Day of Judgment and the kind of questions the kuffar used to ask the Prophet ﷺ. So in verse 42, Allah Ta'ala mentions one of the questions. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ السَّاعَةِ أَيَّانَ مُرْسَاهَا. They ask you, O Prophet, about the hour. When will it occur? And Allah Ta'ala then tells the Prophet ﷺ what he should say to that. Says, فِيمَا أَنْتَ مِنْ ذِكْرَاهَا. And it says, and in what are you from its remembrance? What's in it for you about the hour? So this means, why are you worrying about it? What is it to you? Only Allah Ta'ala knows when it's coming. Another interpretation of this is regarding what, and then there's a new sentence. What you are from its remembrance. In other words, meaning that you are a sign of the Day of Judgment, because there is no prophet after this prophet, and there's no shariat after this, no new shariat after this shariat that we have. In fact, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that said, me and the Day of Judgment are like these two fingers. Yani from the time the dunya was related to the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yani that's been so when dunya was created and up to the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, obviously a long time has elapsed, and so what's left now between now that time and the end of the time is a very short time left. So this means that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is essentially a reminder of the coming of the final hour as well. Then in verse 44, ila rabbika muntahaha, and towards your Lord is its ending, meaning that the news of when the Day of Judgment is going to come is only with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then verse 45, innama anta mundiru man yakhshaha, so indeed you are a warner of whom fears it. So meaning if someone doesn't fear Qiyamah, then how will you even warn them? Your duty is just to warn people and then not to inform them of when it's going to come. Just warn them, tell them that it's going to happen, and you don't need to worry about all the minor details about exactly when it's going to be. Again, that's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nobody knows. But the one who fears, then he will take that as a warning and act accordingly. And the one who kind of denies it, obviously is not going to really take it seriously anyway. And then finally Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, كَأَنَّهُمْ يَوْمَ يَرَوْنَهَا لَمْ يَلْبَثُوا إِلَّا عَشِيَّةً أَوْ ضُحَاهَا, which means on that day they will see it as though they did not stay except an evening or its morning. So basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that the length of the Day of Judgment, Allah has mentioned the length of the Day of Judgment so that the life of this dunya will seem so short compared to the Day of Judgment. So it will seem like it was just a morning or evening. And Allah Ta'ala is telling us that look, for this one morning's pleasure, you're sacrificing essentially your whole akhirah. So a saying of someone is that the dunya is one day and I'm fasting on that day. So here basically is the end of this surah Naziat, and inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala we'll continue with the next surah inshallah tomorrow. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our gathering here together to go through the dars of Quran. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all tawfiq to take heed of the messages that we're learning in the Quran, and allow us to maximize our time in this blessed month. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.